Okay, so now I'm back in my demo organization as the system administrator. And the first thing that I want to look at is, let's go to settings and processes. So these things are all in the solutions for chapter 3. We go to processes, and I want to look at this case routing and escalation workflow. And this workflow, it's got a scope of organization. It is triggered when a case is created. Here's the case. So the primary entity is case, record is created, case routing and escalation, hide the properties. Now, I've got this scary red X here. What does that mean? For those of you that have the book, if you've ever imported the solution for chapter 3 and you open this workflow, a couple of others from this chapter, you'll see a lot of scary red X's. And this one only has one down here. So in this otherwise block, I've got this scary red X that sort of seems to resolve to this step right here, create queue item. So before I fix it, what does this workflow do? You can kind of get a feel for it, even just looking from up here. So it's got this big if block, and it checks to see whether the customer's category, the account customer category field, if it's standard, then what I'm going to do is do some routing. So a case gets routed to a queue, standard level 1, and then I go into await. I time out for a number of days, and then check the status after 5 days, and if it's still open, if the case hasn't been resolved, then I want to escalate it to the standard level 2 queue. On the other hand, this conditional block, this otherwise condition, says, okay, if it's preferred customer that the case has been created for, then I'm going to route it to premier level 1, so on and so forth. Now, if you look up, let's say, look at this one here. What am I doing here to route? When we say route, we're not really routing anything. We're creating a record, and the record that we're creating is a queue item. So the way you route records to a queue is you create a queue item record corresponding to the case. So if I click set properties here, you look at dynamic values here, see what's going on. I'm creating a queue item within the premier level 1 queue, and the queue item that it's being created, the item that the queue item is being created for is the case. And I know this sounds a little bit circular, but that's the way queue routing works in CRM 2011. Basically, one record, say case, can only be represented in one queue at a time. So that's how this works like that. So if we look at the first block, first we route the thing to the standard level 1 queue, and then after the timeout we route to the standard level 2 queue. I know that this create queue item step is going to remove it from that level 1 queue. It can only be in one queue at a time. Here's the point. Why this scary red X here? If I try to activate this process right now, it says there's errors in the process definition, and this is what you'd get. And I refer to this in the book, but I just wanted to go through this because it's probably not as obvious as it needs to be. Here's the issue. This case workflow has references to these queues, but queues cannot be part of a solution. What Dynamic CRM does is it picks up the fact that that queue is not there, so it puts this little quote thing in as a placeholder, but it won't let you activate the process until that queue is really there. So this is just a text string, so you can kind of see what's going on. So if I go out here, and let's see, standard level 1, standard, I created all these today. So then what I'm going to do here is create this premier level 2, just do it on the fly, level 2. It's not important that it be called that. It could be called anything I want it to be called, but I'll go ahead and just stick with the example. So now I've actually selected the real queue, save and close, and now you'll see the scary red X goes away, and I will be able to activate this process. So a process can activate with scary red X's in it, but now that I've cleaned that up, I can activate it. And before I do that though, let me show you another kind of a trick that you can use. Suppose this is my service level agreement for standard level 1, timeout until 5 days after case created on. Well, let's suppose what I really want to do is test it right now. So let's click on this condition. Let me show you how timeouts work. Here's your timeout condition. But what I want to do is a timeout wait condition by set properties here has a process variable, and the only thing I can select here is timeout. So basically what this convention does is it forces the process to go into a timeout, and it's going to wait until, in this case, it's 5 days after the date that the case is created on. But let's make this a little bit more testable and make that 5 minutes. Or how about 2 minutes? Let's make things interesting. So I'll make it 2 minutes after case created on. And in this case, all you got to do is click on that created on, and then it goes into the value there. So now we can actually test this. You have to have a pretty stern service level agreement to have that be your real service level escalation point. But anyway, so we're going to get some mileage out of that. And then let's make our premiere. So process timeout equals, let's actually do this. I'll create one of these so you can see how you do this. So let's delete this. So let's suppose we're just building out the logic of this thing. Let's collapse that. I don't have this in stages. I could add stages if I wanted to, but we'll look at some staged ones elsewhere. So here's my otherwise branch. We check to see what the category is. And remember, what we're doing is we're checking the value of the customer. Right? We're not checking case directly. We're checking the customer. If you wanted to bulletproof this to take account of the fact that cases might be created for people, that is contacts, as opposed to just accounts, I could have logic in here that checks the regarding value just to make sure that it's a account. But let's suppose they all get created for that. So customer category equals preferred customer. So here's my preferred folks. Come in here. We first route it to that queue. Then what I want to do is put the timeout in here. So I'll add a step. And what I'm going to do here is put a wait condition. By default, I'll mention, when you insert a step, it goes after the current step you're on. You can change that if you want to, but you have to remember to change it back. So here's my wait condition. So now, after I do the initial routing, let's put the wait. And I come in here and configure this. And here's what this looks like the first time you come in. I want to select from local values. So I'm going to choose process, then tab across here and choose timeout equals, and let's make this 1 minute after the case is created on. So you really got to hustle to get these things resolved. So in this case, I should say in this instance, here's my timeout. So it's routed it. Now I'm going to select underneath the timeout so that this is embedded. Here's only going to happen if this condition is met. Just add step. What do I want to do to route it to the Premier Level 2 queue? Create record. So here's your queue routing. So I'm going to create not a queue, but a queue item. So I create a queue item, set properties. Here's the queue that now is created, because I created that, Premier Level 2. And the thing that I route to it is simply going to be the case, right? Not a specific case. It's the case that the workflow is running on. So I don't want to just use that lookup there. Save and close. And then we can activate this thing and run it. So now a workflow like this, you can test. You could also, by the way, expose this as an on-demand process if you wanted to test it, but a workflow like this, maybe not the best thing for an on-demand process. For one thing, the created on date wouldn't be that relevant. If you run this, if expose this for on-demand use to test it, you'd have to keep track of what the created on date was for the different cases you were testing it on. So let's just go ahead and create a new case. Okay. Let's create a new case record. Of course, it's a problem with shipment, keeping with the scenario for the sample data set, apparently. And let's go ahead and save it. Let's close the form assistant here and see what workflows are running. There's case routing and escalation. So it says it succeeded. And let's see. Let's look at Magenium and see if we have an issue with, see what Magenium's status is as a customer. Category, there we go. So it did what it was supposed to do. Let's make this a preferred customer now. So none of those conditions were caught, so the workflow just drops through, right? So now, because remember, that's what it's testing, is the value of that field on the customer record. So now Magenium's preferred customer, and we'll just call this testing going on. So now this is in progress, and it hits the wait, and let's see where the case is. If we go look at queues, so I navigate to queues, and let's look at all items in the, where should that be? In the Premier Level 1 queue. Here's that test case that's in there. And in a couple of minutes, this will be in a different queue, because where we are right here is on the, we go into the workflow to do some monitoring. Collapse this, expand the, oops, come down here. So we're now in the timeout here. So 1 minute after the case is created, it's going to disappear from that queue, and then the workflow is going to be done, right? Because there's no real much more in the way of escalation logic that does. So if I was able to vamp exactly for 60 seconds, what you're going to see is this is eventually going to get removed from the Premier Level 1 queue. We'll come back to this in a little bit. And it's going to get routed off to the Premier Level 2 queue. So that's case routing. Let's take a look at the these two processes here. I want to take a closer look at the gated sales process and the, also I want to look at all processes, because what I want to do is I want to take back the process that is assigned to my sales manager in the West Business Unit, this one here, the manual sales process, and I want to reassign it to me. Okay, so here's the anomaly I was talking about before. So here's this manual sales process that's assigned to Rooster, and notice that it's deactivated. Well, let's suppose I want to activate it for him. I created the workflow, and now I want to activate it for my sales manager. I can't, because you can't activate a process that you don't own. So that's kind of an interesting thing. There's really no way as a system administrator in the root business unit to create a targeted workflow that runs automatically for a child business unit and then activate it yourself, unless you have an account in that business unit. So what I'm going to do is assign it to me, and I'm going to keep it unactive for now, okay, because we just want to look at it, okay, because I don't want the manual sales process and the gated sales process running on the same record. And that's what would happen if I activated that, okay. So let's go take a look at what these things do. And in particular, what I want to focus on for this discussion here is that both of these workflows have stages. So notice this one, so this is my manual sales process. Here's the qualify stage. Come down here, here's the develop solution stage, and here's the negotiate and close stage. What happens if I delete one of these stages? If I select the stage and click delete this step, notice it tells me deleting a stage does not delete the steps in the stage. Well, that's good. So I could click remove it. I'm not going to do that, but if I removed it, all it does is going to take everything that's here and pop it in the previous stage, and then I could, come back and, create. Well, actually, I'll show you. So I click OK. Now everything's in that stage. So what I could then do is let's see, suppose I click this stage here, right? And I choose to insert a after step, and I'm going to add a stage. I'm selected on a stage, so it knows I can do that, right? Well, then it's going to take everything and put it in that stage. Okay, so for now, let's just close this out because that manual sales process isn't activated anymore. The gated sales process is. Just to load this up, you'll see the structure is fundamentally similar. I've got a qualify stage, then I've got the develop solution stage, and then I've got the negotiate and close stage. But look what this workflow does. It's a little bit different. This one here sets default values for a stage, then creates a task, and then what it does is going to do things like check. Let's deactivate this so you can see it. That's why this is I'm referring to this as a gated sales process, right? Because this one does some things, but then it checks to see what kind of opportunity is. There's that type value, and then here's some of those job aids that I was talking about. So it attaches what I'm referring to as a reference story. So if it's a type 1 opportunity, I want to add the appropriate reference story to this opportunity record. And what I've got is I've got a customization on opportunity, a lookup to what? This is a lookup to sales literature. Sales literature is actually pretty useful, I think, in Dynamics CRM 2011. And this is a small customization on the opportunity record type. And I describe this in some detail in the book. Some of you might think too much detail, but better too much than not enough, right? And what this workflow does is if it's a type 1 opportunity, it's got this kind of customized opportunity form, and it goes to the Stage 1 requirements section and adds the type 1 reference story to the opportunity so the sales rep knows what's going on with it. If it's type 2, does something similar. Otherwise, I've got a generic reference story. And this is another one of those cases where you wouldn't be able to activate this workflow because if you don't have the sales literature, which I can't include in a solution, then you're going to have scary red X's here. So you need to create that. So you can activate these things, and you can import the solution, but you can't activate the processes until you supply the data that they need. So then here's the wait. So notice here what we're doing is we're waiting until something happens. We're not waiting for a user to select a value from a pick list here. We're actually saying, okay, let's see what they do. And I'll show you how this thing runs. Let's activate it. So that's active. Now we're going to come back to the guts of this workflow in a minute. But first, let me show you the point about the dependence of the sales pipeline report on a special kind of a workflow. So what I want to do here is go run the sales pipeline report. So this is the out-of-the-box sales pipeline report. And here's your head scratcher the first time you see this. It's a really good report. And I'm just going to clear all of this stuff. Let's just run it on all of our open opportunities. So this is the built-in sales pipeline report. And I know that the first impression of this is often pretty underwhelming because there are a few things less interesting from a visual standpoint than a bar chart with one data point, right? It doesn't tell us much. But here's the deal with this report. Notice if I say group by sales processes and select this drop-down list, notice what we have here is we've got the gated sales process, the manual sales process, and the overdue opportunity process all available as options here. Why are those things available there? If I select the gated sales process, and let's say, okay, group by sales stage, that looks interesting. This is a very specific use of the term sales stage, and that is the stages of the actual workflow process. So what this report is doing is it's automatically looking for special type of a workflow process running on opportunities. That is something that has stages, and it only shows, so it's going to filter, right, by, so this thing, if I choose the manual sales process and group by sales stage, this is a different filter of the data. Notice it's 391,000, 5 opportunities. So these are all the opportunities that manual sales process that the West guys have been running. This is all the opportunities that are in that sales process. So this is a very specific thing about this report. It's actually a pretty good report, right? You can do things like, if I drill down through here, here's everything that's in the qualify stage. If I open up this record, and so this filter is a bad filter because it doesn't even filter it for open opportunities. So let's say opportunity status equals open. So it's our real pipeline. So status equals open. There's nothing in this report that by default filters out one opportunity. So here's my real pipeline. Here's my manual sales process. Click View Report. Okay, so everything's in the qualify stage here. It may just be one opportunity. Let's see. So we drill down through there. So I've got two deals. So one for 25 and one for 12.5, base revenue and then weighted revenue. So let's go to this one, this Q4 deal, and let's progress this. The workflow that's running on this, remember this manual process, if I go down here and look at the workflow, here's the manual sales process. It's in this waiting state here. Run this thing, and I can see the way this workflow works is it's just waiting me to select, waiting for somebody to select a different sales stage. So that's in the sense in which this is manual. So it's waiting for me to do this. So let's go back to the opportunity. And remember, I got here by drilling through the sales pipeline report. So we push this now to the develop solution, and we save it. And let's close that window and go back and refresh this. So now what we've done is we've pushed that $100,000 opportunity to the develop solution stage. Now this looks a little bit more different. But if I look at the gated sales process, so all the opportunities that are running that sales process are now represented here. And I believe I still got so the status is it's filtered properly. And I go into, say, this group here. Now this is the gated process. Let's go into the Litware Q4, and let's go into something that is a little bit bigger we can see. So this Q2 project for affordable. So this workflow works a little bit differently, and it's actually waiting for me as the sales rep to do something in one of these sales stages sections on the opportunity record type. So when this thing gets done doing what it's doing, by going to the sales stages section, so you see what it's done, it's added that type 2 reference story there, and it's waiting for me to say, okay, I've verified the budget and identified a power sponsor. This could be fancier if I wanted it to be, but now I save that information and we go look at the workflow. If I do this quickly enough, notice the workflow is in progress right now, but it takes a second, then its status is going to change to waiting because now it's hit the next wait condition. So now we've come down here, we've gone through the qualify stage, there's the wait for stage 1 requirements, wait until the opportunity budget verified contains data and the power sponsor contains data. So now I've supplied that information. And now we're down in stage 2 here, and it's waiting for stage 2 requirements. So this is the sense in which this is gated. So what we're doing is we're waiting now until the proposal presented contains data, and then what it'll do, the way this workflow works, it actually creates a task for each stage. So here's my activities, here's my open activities for this opportunity. So I've got a stage 2 requirements task. This would push down to my Outlook if I'm using the Outlook client, so I'd get the reminder and all that, right? But it tells me, if I look at the task, right? So here's another job aid. I could put a pretty descriptive task in here and tell them exactly what they need to do as the sales rep to progress this through. I just put boilerplate in here for now. But basically, so now I look down at the sales stages section again of the opportunity record. Here we are on stage 2, and I say, yep, both identified the power sponsor, budget, and presented the proposal in the same day. That's a good day, right? So now the workflow fires up again and goes to the next stage. And meanwhile, here's the report that we used to drill through to get to this. And if I refresh the report, now this is that opportunity already progressed. It was in stage 2. Now we're on to stage 3, right? Because I completed the stage 2 tasks. So here's this one, the Q2 project for affordable. And I come down here, and I see here we are in the sales stages, right? So there's my proposal presented, and then terms approved and contract presented would be the stage 3 requirements, and then it would be done. But anyway, so the main point there is that there's some drill down on how those actually work, but also that interesting dependence on the of this built-in sales pipeline report on these special kinds of workflows. These workflows with stages and the group buys. You can just use these other group buys too, right? But that sales stage is kind of the default. So if you don't have any staged sales process workflows, you won't have anything showing up here. On the other hand, if you do have sales process workflows and you don't have stages, well, add stages to them, and then you can leverage this report. It's got some nice things. Weighted revenue versus estimated revenue. This stuff is all built in. That's kind of nice. So there's a fair amount of work embedded in this report, but you can't really take advantage of it unless you have those those specific kind of sales processes. Let's take a quick look at the overdue opportunity workflow, because that's another good illustration of waits and timeouts. So what does this thing do? We looked at this briefly, but show you a couple of things that are kind of interesting about this report. So this thing has, I'll show you another way to test these things. First, there's two stages. This is the wait branch. So we wait until the opportunity is either won or lost, and then we stop the workflow if it is. But if that doesn't happen, there's your timeout. This is a parallel wait branch. So here's my timeout until 1 day before the estimated close date. And then we go a day after, and then if we finally hit that one, close it out. So let's go create a new opportunity record. I'll make a new record. This is kind of an interesting scenario to go through, and we'll wrap up here in a few minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So I will call this it's a $50,000 deal, and we think it's going to close just in time for Christmas there. And we go ahead and save it. Now the workflow is going to fire off, and the workflow that I'm interested in now is the overdue opportunity workflow. It's in progress now, but it'll hit the wait, and now it's in the first wait, so it's waiting for what? It's going to wait until one of these two things happens, until either the status becomes lost or won, or it becomes December 24th, right? But what about if I change the estimated close date? Is that going to trigger this thing? I remember wondering that the first time I did this too. Let's suppose I make this, customer called and they say it's really going to close tomorrow. Save it. Let's scroll down and look at the workflow. Overdue opportunity, it says it's waiting, right? So let's see where it's waiting. Notice what happened. As soon as we changed that date on the opportunity record, it picked it up here. So the workflow engine is smart enough to figure that out, right? There'd be a hassle if you always had to, do some extra things to check that. But if the date changes, right, as opposed to the clock ticking, right? So now this condition was satisfied. Now we're here in this scenario. So now it's waiting. Let's go change it again, and let's say that for some reason we change the estimated close date to 11/8. Uh-oh. Notice the gated sales process is canceled. Now the opportunity has a status of loss. I didn't even need to go into the workflow to see that, but it picked it up, the fact that the date was now yesterday. So that's another way you can test these things. You don't really have to um, make it, 1 minute or something like that. You can also change the dates. So those things also get picked up. Okay, so that's a little bit on that. Let me jump back to the deck and okay, a couple of things about dialogues. We're going to drill down on those in the next session. Dialogues require user input in the form of prompts and responses. They do have a primary entity, but one of the most important things about dialogues is they can extend their data context with queries and lookups. So dialogues, in a sense, have more built-in flexibility than workflows because the data context can change and be kind of expanded as you move along in a dialogue. And in a sense, I think dialogues are interesting because they do provide a glimpse of the so-called the process-centric or the flow UI that's coming up in the December 2012 service update. Um, and the sense in which I mean that is that dialogues divorce the process a little bit more from data, from the record that the primary record that the workflow is written for, in some ways more than workflows do. Workflow has its data context when it starts, and that's all it's ever going to have. So it's written, say, for the opportunity record, very record-centric experience. Dialogue's a little bit more flexible than that because you can extend the data context. But in this new process-centric UI that's coming up, interesting thing about that is the form itself isn't specific to a record. We'll see examples of that. We'll see a process, a sales process that starts with a lead, continues through an opportunity, and so two different record types, but within the same process. And the form is about the process. So in a sense, that gives us a good glimpse, and to the extent we can show things like that in these sessions, I may do that because there's actually, believe it or not, a new process designer for this process-centric UI to design these specific types of processes that can, say, span record types. This brings us to the end of our scheduled time, and I'll remind you, session 3 is coming up, so November 30. So it's not quite in December, but maybe we'll get an early holiday present for Microsoft, and the December 2012 service update will be showable at that point. Different start time, 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. If nobody has any questions, thus concludes what passes for formal content of today's session. I'll thank you for attending. I'll stick around in case anybody does. But if you do take off, thanks for attending, and I hope to see you in the November 30 session where we're going to drill down on dialogues and some related concepts and topics.